afternoon session, which is entitled Emerging Kurdish Dynamics, Regional Implications, just forget the last word, turmoil. We have been talking a great deal about the region, about what's going on, especially ISIS and the fight against ISIS. And we are in northern Iraq, we are in Kurdistan, and events in the Kurdish regions of the Middle East are also happening at a tremendous pace. There's a great deal of change, both in the KRG, in Turkey, with the peace process, obviously in Syria. And so this is the issues we're going to explore tonight, this afternoon here. And we have a distinguished panel. Let me just say, my name is Henri Baki. I'm on the Board of Trustees of the American University of Iraq in Suli. And I'm very happy to first introduce Saleh Muslim, who's the co-chair of the Democratic Union Party in Syria, as most of you know. Our second speaker will be Hafizeh Ipek, who actually the program says she's from the Peace and Democracy Party. In fact, the Peace and Democracy Party officially doesn't exist anymore. She is the co-chair of the Democratic Regions Party, which is a new regional party that has been created in southeastern Turkey, in the Kurdish regions of southeastern Turkey. Our third speaker will be Kaman Karadagi, who is a well-known journalist, having spent a long time on Al-Hayat, also was the chief of staff to Imam Jalad, to President Talabani when he was president. Joost Hilterman is, Joost Hilterman, I should be, Joost, okay, is no stranger to this part of the world, having written a wonderful book, and also is at ICG. He's a program director for the Middle East and North Africa. And last but not least is Amberin Zaman, whom most of you know with her fabulous pieces in The Economist. She's the Turkey correspondent of The Economist and a long-time watcher of both the Kurdish question in Turkey and in the KRG, and one of the few journalists who keeps going in and out of the Kurdish regions for her reporting. So I've asked all the participants to talk about for 10 to 12 minutes. And I should also say that our second speaker, Ms. Hafizeh Ipek, will be speaking in Turkish. So on your devices, channel 3 is for the translation from Turkish into, I presume, English, right? With that, I will pass the baton to Saleh Muslim.
Hello to everybody, and first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Barham Saleh and all the people who give us this opportunity to meet all those people here. Actually, it's a very good help to see what's going on in our area in the Middle East, and especially in the Kurdish area, and all the nations to deal with each other, to have a dialogue. So it's a good step. I hope it should be repeated again and again, and of course you should invite us also. It's first time for me. Well, first of all, I think we need an overall view what's going on, because maybe all the people who talked, they were talking on peace, I mean, what to do. But let's say, well, we are talking about Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is a very ancient place, and there were many nations living since thousands of years all together, maybe the Kurds and the Syriacs, Arabs, Armenians, and all the religions are from the Middle East, and mainly they were rooted in Mesopotamia. I mean, Christianity, maybe Jewish people, and then Muslims. So this is area for everybody, and even the Zaradashtis, Yazidis, and I mean, you can find everything in this area. So those people, they were living together since thousands of years and maybe hundreds of years, some other components. And they didn't have too much. Always they were a target from the power from outside. They used to invade this area, and they were defending themselves. And sometimes they succeeded, sometimes they fall, but this was the history. Till the beginning of the 20th century, which the nationalist states, let's say nation states, came to the Middle East, and then they tried to make some states enforce the actual situation without any background of the historical or even geographical or maybe historical. So this division of the Middle East and the Mesopotamia caused a problem, and the victims of this operation was mainly the Kurds, the Syriacs, and the other nations, the small nations, or they didn't governing the places. So they were victims in all centuries, all 20th century. So they were killed, they were, maybe sometimes they were massacred, and I mean, everybody of us know what happened in the 20th century. And the beginning of the 21st century, which all the humanity, and in this area also, everybody looking for the democracy, and the things became global. So those nations and these components in this area, they were looking for the freedom, for the maybe the humanity, for the human rights and the human values. So the old division of the area is not more enough for those people. So this something should be changed at the beginning of 21st century. And everybody knows this reality. So because of that, everybody wanted to make these changes according to them, to their interest, to their benefits, to their maybe what they are looking for, planning for, according to their plans. So now in the beginning of the 21st century, which we are living now, what we have, there is something called ISIS or Daesh, whatever it is. So this is only a tool. They created this tool to destroy everything. It's just like a bulldozer to destroy the place in order to rebuild it, or to renew it, or to make the new projects. So what we are looking is this tool, but this tool is not one head and not one body. Many of the sides, which they have their interest and their maybe benefits, they are trying to use this tool to destroy everywhere. And mainly, they were directed to the Kurdish people. And what happened? Maybe everybody of you are following it. What happened? I mean, they all born, maybe somebody says it was born in Iraq, and then they passed to Syria, and then back to Al-Mosul, and then attacked Al-Mosul, attacked Sinjar, attacked Kobani, and everywhere. And we in Rojava, a place which I am belong, the Kurdish part of Syria, we called it Rojava. We are fighting against this ISIS since 2 years. The name is not important, but the mentality is important, because if you finish Daesh, there is another one called Jabhat al-Nusra. If you destroy it, there is another one called Jabhat al-Islamiyya. It's the same mentality, even the names are different. They don't know. They don't know even to do it, what to do. They just destroy everything. And what they have destroyed, maybe just a few days ago, you have seen, I mean, the ancient places which belong to this, is a kind of humanitarian values. They destroyed it. The same mentality. They are destroying the mosques, destroying all the prayer places, and maybe the church, and everything they can. They are just destroying. They cannot build, and they don't have a strategy. So because of that, I think instead of thinking of this one, Daesh will be defeated. But what we can do, I mean, against this one, against this tool not to destroy. Okay, we can do something militarily, which we have done in Rojava, and everybody knows the Kobani. What happened with Kobani? There was organized people, so we have to organize ourselves. The organized people, they can stand against this kind of brutal organizations. I mean, slaughtering the people. So if you are organized, you can defeat them. And of course, just because this ISIS or this organization is became global, they don't know the borders, they can be everywhere, they are a threat for the European, they are slaughtering the European, slaughtering the Americans, slaughtering what, I mean, wherever their hand reach, they can killing the people, destroying everywhere. So even the war against this kind of organization should be in global dimension. I mean, everybody who want to defend the humanitarian values, who want to defend the humanity, who want to defend the people, the being, they should be all together. Until now, of course, there is a very shining example what happened in Kobani. We could defeat them just because, first of all, we were organized people in Kobani. This is one. Secondly, we got help from our Kurdish friends, Peshmergas. They helped us, they were there. And the third one is the international alliance, which they helped us by the airstrikes. So I think what happened, maybe it should be some mistakes or so, but this example should be repeated everywhere we can have a war against this ISIS. And this is, all of this is not enough. We are talking, I mean, when we are talking about ISIS, we are talking about the mentality. So this, something should be done for the mentality. Maybe changing the education system at the schools. We are in the Middle East, we know the countries, we know the education system in many countries. And these education systems in these countries are producing such a mentality, which is destroying everybody, destroying, I mean, they are not recognizing, I mean, the humanitarian values, the humanitarian beings. So I think it should be a global work, and even changing the education systems in these areas, to be able to defeat such mentalities. So this is the way, but for the Kurdish people, I think the main target, one of the main targets of ISIS was the Kurdish areas, the Kurdish places. I mean, they attacked Shangal, and everybody knows, I mean, slaving the women, selling the women, slaughtering the people. Till now, about 5,000 Yazidis, we don't know what happened to them. And the women of the Yazidis still are sold in some places like Raqqa and other places, which is a shame for the humanity, I mean, to have these things. It happened in Shangal, and they wanted to do it in Kobani, but they couldn't succeed it. And now they are trying, yesterday we have news, they are trying to do it in Serikaniye. So it means, I mean, the Kurdish people should be aware of this one, about this threat for all the Kurdish being. There are some sides, they are not accepting the Kurdish being in the area. And I would like to say, now this model we have established in, I'm sorry to have a few minutes more maybe, just because I want to talk more. I mean, we established a model in Rojava, which is a self-democratic model. Actually, we were enforced to do it because we protected our area, and we have to secure the demands of the people, to look after our people. So we chosen this model, which is could be self-administration, democratic self-administration in the Rojava area, and it is an example for Syria, for future Syria. And not only that, it could be a model for all the Middle East. I mean, for all the components to live together, and democratic values, for example, just because they had a freedom and they have a democracy, the women were defending the Kobani first of all. I mean, the women defeated ISIS. The women could defeat Daesh in our area. They were fighting. I mean, not like a soldier, I mean just doing like a man, in the women way, because they have their all, I mean, special organized, depending on the women and their thinking, and they can organize themselves, and they can do what, not only protect themselves, their rights, even they protect their society also. So because of that, the only way to have a kind of democratic establishment, I mean democratic system in everywhere, and let the people to defend themselves. And that's what we have done in our area, and we succeeded. And we hope this could be a model for everybody to make people defend themselves. And this is only the way to defeat them. I mean, organize the people, and the war against ISIS should be in the global way. Everybody should share it. And, of course, you should depend on your people in democratic way. Of course, I mean with the other components living, which is the same for Iraq, is the same for Syria, and same for all the countries, and even for all the Middle East. Well, thank you, and we are ready for your questions also.
Hafize Hanım. Buyurun.
Arkadaşlara sonsuz teşekkürlerimi sunmak istiyorum burada. Tabii dünden beridir önemli bir forum düzenlenmekte. Elbette ki bu forumun sonuçlarının olumlu şekilde özellikle dört parça Kürdistan'a yayılması bizler için oldukça anlamlı ve değerlidir. Bugünü yorumlamaya kalktığımızda mutlaka tarihsel bilinci de değerlendirmek gerekiyor. Yani nasıl oldu da bugünlere gelindi? Bunları bilmeden gerçekten geleceğe yön verebilmek oldukça zor görünüyor. Öyle bir coğrafyada yaşıyoruz ki bu coğrafyada savaşlar hiçbir zaman eksik olmamıştır. Hiçbir zaman savaşlar bitmemiş ve bütün savaşlar çıkar menfaatler üzerine kurulmuş. Bu bölgede yaşayan, Kürdistan'da yaşayan diğer halklar için ve Kürtler için hiçbir gelecek düşünülmeden kendi çıkarları peşinde birçok savaşlar geliştirilmiştir. Ancak savaşların doğurduğu sonuçlar bugün belli mücadelelerle elde edilen sonuçlar var. Kürdistan'ı 4 parçaya bölüp büyük bir asimilasyon politikası uygulandı. Elbette ki bu asimilasyon politikası bugün dahi uygulanmaktadır. Türkiye'de kendi ana dilinde eğitim görmek yasaktır. Yani benim çocuğum Kürtçe eğitim görmek istiyorsa, ben çocuğuma Kürtçe eğitim vermek istiyorsam, Türkiye'de bunu yapabilmem için ücretli parayla bunun dersini aldırmam lazım. Dünyanın hiçbir yerinde hiçbir ana dil parayla satın alınmamıştır. Ancak Türkiye'de bu gibi problemler var. Asimilasyon politikası bir taraftan kültürel kıyımlar, ekolojik kıyımlar, bir taraftan da ne kadar çok daraltabilirim anlayışıyla kendisini götürmekte. Tabii bu politikalarda da zaman zaman başarılar da elde edilmiştir. Şöyle yapmak isteyenler tarafından demek istiyorum. Şöyle ki, aidiyet duygusunu Kürtlerde oluşturmakta oldukça başarılı olmuşlardır. Bundan birkaç yıl öncesine kadar da Süleymaniyeli Kürt kendisini Ahmetli, Kobaneli ya da Urmiyeli bir Kürt olarak göremiyordu. Ancak Kobani'de gerçekleşen kahramanca savaş, kahramanca mücadele, DAEŞ çetelerine karşı gerçekleştirilen mücadele bütün Kürtleri bir araya getirdi. Ancak bundan dolayıdır ki Kürt Konferansı'nın bir an önce yapılmasını talep ediyoruz. Çünkü yetersizlikler kesinlikle bu birlikteliği, bu dayanışmayı engelleyici en büyük güçlerdir. Tabii İran'da birçok idam var. Her gün hemen hemen insanlar idam ediliyor. Eğer İran'daki idamları ben Ahmet'te, Hevler'de, Süleymaniye'de, Kobani'de aynı duyguları, buna karşı çıkış duygularını yaşayamıyorsam burada bir aidiyet duygusu yoktur demektir. Bizim en çok Kürtlerin ihtiyacı olan şey birbirleriyle dayanışmalı, birbirleriyle ortak paydalarda bir araya gelerek kendilerini korumaları. Çünkü her alanda büyük bir korkuyla, büyük bir kaygıyla yaşanmakta. Örneğin Türkiye'de hemen hemen her gün tutuklamalar olur. Bugün dahi basından edindiğimiz bilgiye göre 50 tutuklama var. Bunlar aslında siyasi soykırımlar olarak değerlendiriliyor. Bu tutuklamalar çoğunlukla demokrasi adına yapılan işlemlerdir. Oysa demokrasiyle bağdaşmayan şeylerdir aynı zamanda. Bizler Türkiye'deki Kürtler olarak anayasal bir güvence istiyoruz. Anayasal güvence, yani Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Devleti, Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Kürtler, Türkler veya orada yaşayan bütün halkların ülkesi olmalı. Sadece anayasada Türkiye Türklerindir diye Türkiye'de yaşayan herkes Türktür diye bir kavram var. Bunu oldukça ırkçı, yani çağımıza, günümüze uymayan koşullara, günümüze uymayan şeyler bunlar. Yine aynı zamanda Türkiye'de bildiğiniz gibi şu anda büyük bir müzakere süreci var. Sayın Abdullah Öcalan'la gerçekleştirilen bir müzakere süreci var. Ve bu müzakereler başlar başlamaz özellikle Kürt sorununun çözümünü istemeyen güçler tarafından Paris'te 3 kadın devrimci katledildi. Müzakereler başlar başlamaz. Bu müzakerelerin başlamasını istemeyen güçler tarafından geliştirildi. Daha sonra Şengal başladı. Şengal'e büyük bir IŞİD'in, DAEŞ'in büyük bir operasyonu oldu. Şu anda Şengalli kadınlar Musul'da köle pazarlarında satılmaktadır. Bütün bunların önüne geçilmesi gereken konular. Yine Türkiye'de günde en az 4 tane kadın öldürülmektedir. Bunun için yasaların caydırıcı olması gerekiyor. Tecavüz eden kişilere verilen cezalarla diğer siyasi anlamda ya da demokratik anlamda mücadele eden kişilere verilecek yasalar aynı değildir. Tecavüz edenlerin cezaları, yani yasadaki karşılıkları oldukça az bir cezadır. Bunun için yasaların bu anlamda da değişmesi lazım. Anayasal güvenceye alınması, kadınlar, çocuklar yine lazım. Şimdi diğer bir durumda Sayın Abdullah Öcalan'ın Kürt sorununun çözümünde Sayın Abdullah Öcalan'ın Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Devleti ile yaptığı müzakere sonucunda 10 maddelik bir şey var. Demokratikleşmedir. Aslında Sayın Abdullah Öcalan'ın orada söylediği maddeler tamamen insani maddelerdir. Yani her ulusun, her halkın olması gereken yerinde olacak maddelerdir. Dolayısıyla bunu karşılamak demek, bu maddeleri karşılamak demek, bunu gurur meselesi yapmadan gerçekten bu sorunun altını samimi bir şekilde çözümden yana davranılıyorsa elbette ki bazı maddelerin kesinlikle değiştirilmesi lazım ve Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Devleti'nin adım atması gerekiyor. Şimdi adım atmadan, hiçbir şey yapmadan, evet gelin her şeyi bırakın ve bize tabi olun demek bize oldukça samimiyetsiz geliyor. Çünkü Kürt halkı artık Türk devletinin bir adım atmasını bekliyor. Bir adım ve somut adımlar olması gerekiyor. Bu anlamda somut adımlar yerine hiçbir şey yapmadan bizler Kürt olarak bunu zaten kabul etmeyecek durumdayız. Oldukça doğru bir sistem olan Kobani'deki sistem, yaşam modeli, Kürt halkının, daha doğrusu Türkiye'de yaşayan Kürtlerin %80'inin bu yaşam modelini onayladığını ve bu yaşam modeli için çalışmalar mücadelesini devam ettiriyor. Dolayısıyla bu yaşam modelini her halkın kendi yaşam hakkını tayin etmesi anlamında bakıyor ve bütün halklar için aynı şeyi düşünüyor. Sadece Kürtler için değildir bu söylediğimiz şey. Bölgede yaşayan bütün halklar, Ermeniler var, Araplar var, Çerkezler var, Rumlar var, Türkiye'de yaşayan bütün halklar için bu aynı şey bizler için de geçerli olmak kaydıyla böyle bir yaşam modeli arzulanıyor. Bütün bunların olabilmesi için gerçekten Türk devletinin bir an önce somut adımları atması, sadece işi önümüzde 7 Haziran'da yapılacak seçimlere endekslememesi, yani bu kadar kısa vadede ve bu kadar simultane düşünmemesi, yani detay düşünülmesi ve geleceğin kaygısını yaşamak gerekiyor bu konuda. Gelecekteki çocuklarımıza bırakacağımız dünya oldukça demokratik bir dünya olmalı. Yoksa biz çocuklarımıza karşı borçlu gideceğiz bu dünyadan, bu ülkeden. Dolayısıyla bütün halkların, Kürt halkının bu konudaki çabaları göz önündedir. Kobani'de, herhalde vaktim var. Kobani'de özellikle, çok az bir şey, Kobani'de özellikle Peşmerge güçlerinin gidip orada savaşması Türkiye Kürdistan'ında çok büyük bir olumlu etki yaratmıştır. Ve bu sürecin devam etmesi, gelişmesi, büyümesi bizler için oldukça anlamlıdır, oldukça değerlidir. Bizler bu konuda dediğim gibi demokratik bir Türkiye olması açısından, demokratik bir yaşam olması açısından, onurlu bir yaşam olması açısından ben Kürdüm ve yasal haklarım olmalı Türkiye'de diyorsam elbette ki bu mücadeleyi sonuna kadar devam ettireceğiz. Ve kadınların özellikle kadınların, bizim partimiz açısından kadınlarla ilgili birçok sorunumuz yok. Ama Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Devleti'nin kadınlarla ilgili olması gereken yasaları acilen çıkarması gerekiyor. Sanırım zamanımı aştım. Çok teşekkür ediyorum beni dinlediğiniz için.
Evet, çok teşekkür ederiz. Next speaker is Kamran Kardari.
I'm very glad to be here. This is the second time I participate in the forum. Always when I read the new dynamics for the region and for Kurdistan, the first thing that comes to my mind is the word borders. Borders and Sykes-Picot. Yesterday, I think Kakushar talked about it in a different context. I actually, a few years ago, wrote an article asking the questions, why is it that the Arab nationalists hate Sykes-Picot, but they love the borders drawn by Sykes-Picot? As far as Kurds are concerned, I don't think we ever loved the borders. In fact, we never respected the borders that divides Kurdistan into different parts. I would talk about the dynamics in Kurdistan region in Iraq within the framework of the current situations. We actually had things changed. We had in Kurdistan several important issues which were supposed to be dealt with. especially there were even before the last elections, in the election campaign, there were a lot of promises to deal with certain issues. These issues were, of course, somehow postponed because of the fight against Daesh. We had the very important issues were some of these issues which are still very important, but they have now a different kind of priorities. Things like Article 140, things like the democratic reform and transparency, relations with between Erbil and Baghdad, which was an issue and still an issue, but it also has been in a different shape. We had the issue of the oil issue between Baghdad and Erbil. These are all important issues which were postponed because of Daesh. One of the problems is that we don't have still, I think, for one of the problems for the Kurdish movement in general, we don't have clear visions and strategies to deal with issues for a long period of time. We seem sometimes to be dealing with issues always when a crisis appears. So we deal with a crisis, then we deal with the next crisis, with the next crisis. We need a different kind of approach to all our to the future. We need a clear vision what to do and how to deal with the current situation with Daesh. If militarily, if we assume that Daesh will be defeated, what afterwards? Do we have a roadmap for after post-Daesh period? I don't think we have such a roadmap. And there are other issues, other dynamics for the Kurdistan region, and that is the relations between different parties and political groups. There are some problems, some issues within certain parties, but there are also issues between parties. And although there are signs, there are meetings, sometimes they discuss what to do, to how to agree on a united approach, but it's still we still lack this kind of vision for all Kurdish parties, and I think some people are already some people made such kinds of proposals, suggestions, to a kind of the necessity to have a kind of national charter among all the Kurdish parties in the region, in order to be prepared for any kind of development. We can't continue with dealing with developments that appear. We must have scenarios. We must have different solutions for expected and unexpected problems that appear. Of course, there are also positive developments, and how to approach with many issues related to the fight against Daesh, which is now a main priority for Kurds, not only in this part of Kurdistan, but in other parts of Kurdistan as well. The fight against Daesh proved that there is a belief among the Kurdish people, there is a belief, there is a firmness among the Kurds to defend the country, to defend our gains. The Peshmergas proved that they have loyalty to the country, they have loyalty to their cause, despite all the difficulties. For a few months, they still, I think some don't have salaries, but they are fighting. They are standing firm to defend Kurdistan. And that is, I think, one of the important developments, and it should be improved and continue. Peshmergas should be a stable military force in the region. Relations, other positive development, I think, is the relation between Kurds in all parts of Kurdistan. It's also one of the new dynamics. And as I said, the fact why we did not respect borders in defiance to the states, now sometimes in some cases the borders are not respected with the consensus of states in the region. And that's, I think, a good development, a good sign, and there should be a kind of more practical coordination and cooperation between all the Kurdish parties in the region, provided these parties should respect other parties. They should not interfere in the internal affairs of other Kurdish parties in different parts of Kurdistan because of many different reasons. And I think there also should be on this front, there should be also a kind of charter among these parties to have a different, a common approach to this. So this is in general what we have, and I think despite all the difficulties, despite all the negative also approaches to different problems, but there is also hope. The instruments are there to improve, to continue a political approach to different kinds of, and I think it will be very important to concentrate on working a practical strategy and to have a clear vision to what will happen and how how the things will develop. So that's in general my approach.
Thank you, Kamal. Just. Is the mic on?
Hello, yes, can you hear me fine?
Is mic on, please?
Go to the device. It's on.
Here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Take mine.
A different one? That's okay, it's okay. No? And this is, oh, beautiful. All right. We're in business. Sorry? We're all ready now, sorry. So I wanted to thank you, first of all, American University and Sulaymaniyah, and most of all, Dr. Baham, who just stepped out, so I cannot tell him personally how grateful I am for being here today and to be able to speak. It's 2015. I first came to Sulaymaniyah, into Kurdistan, in fact, in April 1991. It was only days after the Kurdish uprising was crushed. I came from Baghdad, driving in a vehicle of an international humanitarian organization. And we drove into Sulaymaniyah, and it was empty. It was a ghost town. We found our way to the Sulaymaniyah hospital, which was also empty, except for a few doctors who had stayed behind. And the first victims coming in from the mountains who had tried to flee into the mountains and had hit landmines and were coming back for treatment for rather horrendous injuries. So that is my first image of Sulaymaniyah, and much has happened since. And now it's been a pleasure to come back on many occasions and to see how this has grown and how it has flourished. It's really a great pleasure. So I'm very glad to be here, only to be able to make that observation. I have to apologize for those of you who don't speak English and to the interpreters who will not be able to translate this, but have you ever noticed that the name ISIS is embedded in the word crisis? And similarly, in the title, the Fertile Crescent in Turmoil, that the word oil is embedded in the word turmoil. Anyway, coincidence? I don't think so. In any case, we are the International Crisis Group, an international conflict prevention organization, independent. We do research throughout the world in areas of armed conflict. We've been active in Iraq since 2002 and have been coming to Kurdistan as well for a long time. Dr. Baham is back. I can repeat my sincere thanks to him for having invited me here. We're coming out with a report very soon on Iraqi Kurdistan, and I will sort of summarize some of the main points of that report in this short presentation. What I want to focus on is the impact of the Islamic State's arrival in Iraq on the situation here in particular. In Iraq generally, very briefly, and then specifically in Iraqi Kurdistan. The arrival of Daesh, the Islamic State, has caused the already very weak state system in Iraq to collapse. What was there was a shell, and now it has been exposed to be a shell, and it has collapsed. And we see total fragmentation of the political system. And secondly, what we have seen, a second result of the attack, has been the militarization of the response. So we've seen a military response rather than a political one. We talk about the politics, but we've really seen only a military response. Now, that's understandable. In the beginning, you needed a quick response, self-defense. But we have yet to see any significant discussion and action on other fronts, political, economic, and otherwise. 1 and 2, the fragmentation and the militarization together, you see a third phenomenon, which is through popular mobilization, is what you can call the militiaization of the response. In other words, there's a military response, but it's fragmented into various militias taking the battle against the Islamic State. And these three phenomena together have then opened the way to the fourth phenomenon, which is foreign intervention. And foreign intervention not in support of a single actor, the Iraqi state, for example, but in support of various actors along partisan lines, be it a certain Peshmerga force or certain Shia militias or the Iraqi state or other actors. And so this fragmentation is now really affecting the situation, and someone earlier in this conference already said that the main threat to Iraq may not be the Islamic State, but may well, in fact, be the absence of a state in Iraq itself and the fragmentation of the political scene. And how do you put that Humpty Dumpty back together again is going to be a huge challenge. Now, I can talk about Iraq for a long time, and I'm not going to talk about it at all. This is a panel about the Kurds, and so I will now speak briefly on that issue. The response in Kurdistan, you might have expected against a common enemy also a unified national response from the KRG. This existed only in name, and I think in reality also the response was fragmented, with different parties and different personalities within the parties responding militarily, sending their own private guards, sending oil protection guards, sending Peshmerga forces from this party, from that party, to fight along this very long front line against Daesh. And the purpose was twofold. One, to defend that front line against the Islamic State, and secondly, to take control over those areas that the Kurds have long claimed and which the Iraqi army abandoned, especially Kirkuk, of course, but along this front line, all these areas. And de facto, what has happened is that the Kurdish forces have not been fighting inside the Kurdistan region, but only in these disputed territories. Two dynamics I want to highlight. One is the Baghdad-Erbil or the Baghdad-KRG dynamic. One party, or in fact one part of one party, has called for Kurdish independence. But in fact what has happened is that with the oil being locked up and with the coincidental collapse of the budget, there has been pressure from Western states and from Iran and from Turkey for Baghdad and Erbil to work together again, to collaborate and to come to an agreement. So a temporary oil deal is struck, and there's talk of reconciliation. But it's not a sincere reconciliation because really, truly, the two parties don't want to work together too much. If there were a functioning federal system, it might work, but instead we have temporary deals and a hope that somehow this continues. Second dynamic is an intra-party dynamic. We have seen the end of the strategic partnership between the KDP and PUK for all practical purposes. In name, it still exists. The PUK is almost gone. It's kept alive by Iran and by the Peshmergas that are now supported by Iran, which are fighting in the disputed territories. In the disputed territories themselves, there is a division of labor between the PUK and the KDP. The PUK defends the southern border from the Iranian border to Kirkuk. The KDP defends from Kirkuk upward to the Syrian border. The important thing is that competition that happens right in that nodal point of Kirkuk, where there is a competition between oil, where the KDP took the Havana Dome and the by Hassan fields, the PUK still has the city of Kirkuk and the old and depleting Baba Gurgur. And I can see a real problem arising there, and I hope it doesn't come to more serious conflict there over time. How to address this problem? Kamaran mentioned very rightly that there has been no strategy and no long-term thinking, and I think this is really a big deficit. We have heard talk about a military response, maybe fighting the ideology of Daesh, the Islamic State, and some hints of the need for a political approach. I want to focus on two things. One is, for the Kurdistan region, what I think the priorities ought to be. One is to secure the southern border. That's obvious and self-evident. This can be done in two ways. It should be done in two ways simultaneously. One is maybe a bit counterintuitive and maybe not particularly popular in the room, but that is to boost the Iraqi state. The only way to secure the southern border of Kurdistan is to have a viable Iraqi state to the south of you that can actually control the areas, both the Shia and the Sunni areas, in a way that they will not pose a threat to the Kurdish region. Of course, you will have to be careful with that because you don't want the Iraqi state that is so strong that eventually it will come back and be a threat to the Kurdish region. But I can assure you that it's not going to be any time around the corner. This is an important thing also because at the moment there is economic collapse in Kurdistan and you are totally dependent on the Iraqi budget and for some time to come. So what is needed is a more permanent oil deal and in fact a federal arrangement, a federal oil law that cements this very important economic relationship between the central government and the Kurdish region. Any call for independence at this point is premature. Secondly, as part of securing the southern border, rather than taking the disputed territories and just telling the local population who are not Kurds that they just have to grin and bear it, is to work with the local population in order to keep them from joining the Islamic State, which they will join if they feel excluded from a Kurd-dominated society in these disputed territories. So in order to prevent future trouble, the status of these territories needs to be subject of negotiation with Baghdad. It cannot be just unilaterally taken and kept. The unilateral taken was justified by the collapse of the Iraqi army. The keeping is not justified in the longer term. The second part of this strategic approach is for the Kurdistan region to put its own house in order. So first securing the border, second, put your own house in order. I think that over the last, after 2003, the Kurds did very well by moving into Baghdad and to working towards strengthening their autonomy from their vantage point of Baghdad. I think in the last few years, the struggle in the disputed territories has overtaken that agenda and has divided the Kurdish parties and has distracted from the more important task of institution building inside the Kurdish region. I think what needs to be done is to strengthen the institutions of the Kurdish region, to unify the KRG, and not have the KRG based on administration along party lines. I think this is what young Kurds want. It's certainly what young Kurds deserve. And I would suggest that if they not get it, they should go and try it and get it themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Amrin.
Yes, everybody can hear me. I want to thank you, Barham, for this wonderful occasion. It's great to be here. Last time I was in Suleymania was in 1995, I think. And those were rather dark days, and so I'm delighted to see how things have changed. And it's lovely to see old friends like Hoshyar. I cover Turkey for The Economist, and I'm Turkish. And Turkey has more Kurds probably than all of the rest of the countries that Kurds do combined, that have Kurds do combined. And so what happens in Turkey will have a profound effect on the future of Kurds in the region. On June the 7th, Turkey will be holding parliamentary elections. And in some respects, we can say that the Kurds hold the key to the future of Turkey's democracy. And I will explain to you why. For the first time, the main Kurdish party, the People's Democracy Party, will be contesting the elections as a party. Why does this matter? Because under Turkish law, in order to win seats in the Turkish parliament, you need to win at least 10% of the national vote. This law was devised by Turkey's generals in 1980 when they seized power, specifically to keep the Kurds out of the parliament. So why are the Kurds now deciding to go in as a party? Why do they feel confident that they can get more than 10% of the vote? Because previously they always fielded candidates knowing that they would probably not get over that threshold and would therefore be denied representation in the parliament. The answer is because in the presidential elections that we had last August, the Kurdish candidate Selahattin Demirtas managed to inspire people across the ideological spectrum. He managed to attract the votes of Turks and Kurds alike, and for the first time, the HDP, the main Kurdish party, received 9.7% of the vote. So they nearly made it to the threshold. So they now feel confident that perhaps now they can actually make it into the parliament as a party. That is what they tell us officially. But that's not what everyone believes. And herein lies the problem. As the lady from the DBP explained, there are ongoing negotiations between the Turkish government and the leader of the PKK, Abdullah Öcalan. And these negotiations, until the present, have remained secret. We really don't know what they involve. And many people in my country question what's going on. They're trying to understand why the HDP is running as a party when it's still a big question mark whether they enter the parliament or not. And the reason this really matters is this. If they do not make it into the parliament, the AK party, the ruling party, will sweep up all of their seats. And this will give the AK the necessary number of seats they need to amend the constitutions in ways that will enable Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president, to become an executive president. And if you have been following Turkish politics at all, you will have noticed that the word authoritarian keeps popping up in any article that we write or that anyone writes about Turkey. And the reason for this is, yes, indeed, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is becoming increasingly authoritarian. The Turkey that we all believed that he was going to create, the one that opened up the way for the Kurds, the one that allowed us to start membership talks with the European Union, all of that now seems to be in the past. And we are confronted with somebody who wants to concentrate power in his own hands. And therefore, that's why I said at the beginning of this presentation that the Kurds hold the key to the future of Turkey's democracy. If they do not make it into the parliament, as I explained, Recep Tayyip Erdogan will have the opportunity to become an executive president. And then what will happen, we really don't know. What will happen if the Kurds are not represented in the parliament? What they tell us is that they will then go their own way. They will have their own de facto parliament in the Kurdish regions. And of course, as somebody who travels to that region very frequently, I can only imagine how much broader the chasm between Turks and Kurds will become. Because especially after Kobani, what I've seen traveling in the Kurdish region, that Kurds who once used to speak of a common future, one that united Turks and Kurds within Turkey's borders, now speak freely of an independent Kurdistan. There are mothers whose sons are now dying beyond Turkey's borders for the Kurdish cause in Kobani, elsewhere in Rojava. And so now the vision that young Kurds, especially in the region, have is one that really is very far removed from Ankara and its politics. So I worry about Turkey's future, and I worry about how the peace process will be affected if the Kurds indeed are left out of the parliament. What will happen? Because if you, again, are following Turkey closely, you will know that the parliament is in the midst of legislating laws that will give police sweeping powers, for instance, to shoot at demonstrators when they want to. And I can give you many more examples, but I just don't want to consume all of my time describing some of the horrible things that are happening in my country. And so looking at the regional picture, I see that there's actually a very big opportunity for Kurds and Turks alike. And if indeed reason prevails in Turkey, and if by some miracle Mr. Erdogan reverts to his previous self, the one that offered us so much hope, what we might expect him to do, what we might expect the government to do, is to lend a hand to the people of Kobani. I was there very recently, not in Kobani itself, unfortunately, but right on the border with Kobani, in a village just facing the town of Kobani. And it was just very sad, really, to see what was happening around me, but also quite inspiring, I must say, because the spirit of unity between those people right on the border and all the people who had come in from Kobani, some 200,000 people in a tiny town, yet nobody was complaining. The local guy who made headstones for tombs, he would do it for free whenever it was a dead guerrilla who was being buried there, and now there's a special cemetery for Kobani in the town of Suruc. There are real opportunities. What Turkey really needs to do is to openly embrace the Kurds of Rojava, because in doing so it will be embracing its own Kurds, because in fact there is no difference. There is now a big opportunity also, on the one hand, to move the political process forward, but also to cooperate with the PKK in the field, because as everybody has been explaining for the past few days here, or a couple of days here, is that the Kurds are the main force that are able to contend with ISIS, to fight it effectively. And we've been talking about the YPG, the Peshmerga, but what we haven't been talking about is the PKK. And in fact, they've been taking a lead role, particularly in Rojava, Kobani, and also in Shengal. And so and of course it also falls upon the PKK to end its hostilities with Turkey and allow the politicians inside Turkey to negotiate that solution. And of course, there's also Abdullah Öcalan. That part, of course, remains opaque. We don't know what's really being discussed, but they should allow the politicians to really take the lead, because only if they do so will Turkish people outside the Kurdish region have the confidence to vote for the HDP and to carry them over that 10% threshold. And it will make it that much easier if they end their hostilities against Turkey, for the United States, for instance, to engage with them. And there can be a win-win situation. And I'm sorry if I rambled, but that's all I have to say for now. Thank you very much.
Actually, you had 1 more minute, so.
Oh, well then I'll say Biji Kurdistan.
We're going to open the floor to discussions, but our chairman, Barham Saleh, wants to ask the first question. He's my boss. I can't say no.
No, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I'm not here speaking as a chairman. I'm speaking as a member of the audience. This is an important panel, and we are here in Suleymania talking about the emerging Kurdish realities. And I thank the panelists for presenting their views. Who would have thought 2 years ago that Syrian Kurdish dynamics will emerge the way it has? I remember in the late 1980s and early 1990s, everybody looked at this reality of Iraqi Kurdistan as a very transient, temporary situation. It won't be long before the Iraqi government will reestablish control. I dare say what I see in Syria is a similar dynamics to what happened in Iraqi Kurdistan around that time. Because there is a fundamental issue in this part of the world. Millions of Kurds have been deprived of basic rights in these countries as a consequence of the so-called peace to end all, the war to end all wars, which ended up for the Kurdish people and for this part of the world, the peace that ended all peace. And this part of the world was condemned to so much violence and so much conflict thereafter. Iraqi Kurdistan, as it emerged, obviously involved a lot of provoking issues for the entire neighborhood. But the irony is, with all the difficulties of Iraqi Kurdistan, post-2003 Iraqi Kurdistan was the most stable part of Iraq, the part of Iraq that had the best relation with all the neighbors of Iraq, Turkey, Iran, and the Arab world. That was quite an irony. And I think it affirms the notion that establishing Kurdish rights is a precedence for stability and security. Here I want to take issue with some of the topics raised by Joost Halterman, and he would expect me to respond to some of those. I agree with you that Kurdistan region needs to do better, definitely needs to do better. We need to institutionalize our government. We need to genuinely unify the KRG and establish a unified military force. But to jump to such simplistic conclusions that PUK and KDP fighters will fight over Kirkuk, it misses one fundamental point. PUK, KDP, Socialist Party, whatever the parties are all in Kirkuk and fighting together against Daesh. That is far more important statement than looking back at the legacies of that situation. Kurdistan is work in progress. We need to do a lot better. Furthermore, you alluded to something that the PUK is sustained by Iran. And for an analyst like yourself who knows this part of the world better than other analysts, this is oversimplification. Iran, Turkey, other neighboring countries are key players in this part of the world, but the PUK has its roots, has its organizations, has its constituencies and communities. I think jumping to such simplistic conclusions misses the point. PUK, and for that matter, other Kurdish parties have problems, have issues of development, and I hope that we can do it within the democratic process, and especially in the context of this fundamental challenge that we have, taking on Daesh and extremism, because at the end of the day, for all the limitations of the Kurdish experience in Iraq, or for that matter in Syria, or for that matter in Turkey, this is better than what we have around us. This model of Kurdish identity and self-government is developing, and it is proving to be a model for stability and is by far much better than what we have around us. We need to improve upon it and not to be complacent, but definitely to basically dismiss it with simplistic terms, I think is a bit over the top. Thank you.
Please, Sheikh. Can you introduce him?
With your permission, Mr. Chairman, Kak Hama would like to speak as well, and I think it will be an honor for us to have him speak. Hama is a veteran Peshmerga. He's a political leader of great renown in this part of the world. But he and Saleh share one common experience. Both have lost their sons fighting Daesh and defending this country. This is truly a statement about leadership. So, Kaka Hama.
بنای خوا پێشکی زۆر سوپاس بۆ زانکۆی ئەمریکی لە سلێمانی زۆر سپاسی برای عزیزم کاک دکتۆر بەرهەمەکەم کە داوەتی کردین بۆ ئێرە سپاسی هەموو خوشک و برا بەڕێزا ناکەم کە لێرن لەسەر ئەو قسانەی ئەمڕۆ دوێنێ ئەوانە هەندێک ڕاوبۆچوونم مەبوو حەزم کرد عەرزتان بکەم زۆر لەو ئەوانەی کە لێرە حوزوریان هەیە زۆریان ناسرا و هاوخەبات و هاوسەنگەر و لە شاخ و لە شار دژی ڕژێمی بەعس پێکەوە بووین لە عێراقیەکان هەموو پێکەوە بەڵام واقعەیەک هەیە پێویستە ئێمە ئەو واقعە دەرک پێ بکەین و مجاملەی یەک زۆر نەکەین باسی واقعەکەی ئەمڕۆی عێراق و منتیقەکە بەعام بەوازیعی بکەین زۆر لە قسەکان وا بوو عێراقیان وا باسکرد وەکو شامی شەریف وا بێت لە ڕاستیە عێراق شامی شەریف نییە ئێستا حەزرەتی حوسەین لە عێراق شەهید کراوە لە عێراق حەزرەتی حوسەین لە کوفە شەهیدیان کردووە سەریان بردووە بۆ شام لەوەوە دەست پێ بکە تا ئێرە عێراق لە دوای پەیمانی سایکس بیکۆ لە دوای دروستبوون ئەو کاتە سێ ویلایەتی بەغدا و مووسڵ و بەسرا عێراقیان لێ دروست کردووە لەو سێ ویلایەتە کەسێک لە عێراق ڕازی نەبوو بە یەکیان قبوڵ نەکرد مەلیکێکیان لە دەرەوەی عێراق ئیسترات کرد بۆ عێراق لە پەنجاکان ئەو مەلیکە کوژرا لە عێراق عەبدولکەریم قاسم کوژرا لە عێراق عەبدولسەلام عارف کوژرا لە عێراق عەبدولڕەحمان عارف پیاوێکی لەسەرخۆ بوو هەڵهات ناردیان عەبدولڕەحمان عارف هەڵهات ناردیانە دەرەوە ئەحمەد حەسەن بەکر نییە کوژرا بوو سەدام حوسێنیش کوژرا باشە ئێستا بڕۆ هەر وڵاتێک لە ئەمریکا ڕەنگە سێ و چوار ڕئیس جمهوری لێ بە پێکەوە کۆ بنەوە لەم ناستەبەکانە بەڵام لە عێراق هەمووی کوژراوە لە ئەوروپا لە هەموو شوێنەکانی تر ئەمە هەمووی بە خوێن هاتووە بە دوای یەکە ئەم کێشانە زۆرە هاتووە تا ئێرە لە دوای ئەوەی 80 ساڵ ئەو حکومە لە دەستی تا ئاخر ڕۆژ سەدام بوو جگە لە کوشتن و گۆڕی بە کۆمەڵ لە خواروی عێراق و کیمیاوی هەڵەبجە و ئەنفال بەجێما بۆمان لە دوای ئەمانەش ئەوە 11 ساڵە لە عێراقدا کێشەکان بە شێوەیەکی تر دووبارە بووەتەوە بۆ سوال لەوە ناکەن داعش بۆ دروست بوو ینی هۆی دروستبوونی داعش لەکوێ هات لەکوێ سەری هەڵدا بەر ئەوە بوو ئەمریکا هات عێراقی ڕووخاند عێراقی تەسلیمی عێراقیەکان کرد بەڵام عێراقیەکان خۆیان ناتوانی عێراقێکی دیموکراتی مافی مرۆڤ ئاوەدانی پێکەوە ژیان بگەێنە نەتیجە مامەڵەکردن لەگەڵ فێکاتەکانی عێراقا بۆشاییەک دروست بوو لەو منتیقەیە ئەو بۆشایە فرسەت بوو بۆ تیرۆر و تیرۆریستان بتوانن بیخۆزنەوە بۆ خۆیان و هەروەها لە نەتیجەی ئەو کێشانە لەدا بینی کوردستان و لە بینی بەغدا لە بینی سونە و لە بینی شیعە ئەمانە هەمووی کێشەی گەورە بوون داعش خۆ تازە دروست نەبووە ڕەنگە زۆر کە زۆر زانێ لە دەی شەشەوە دروست بووە داعش لە 2009 دروست بووە ئەو عومەری بەغدادی مەسئولی بوو لای بەغداد کوژرا لەو منتیقەیە لە زۆر دروست بووە هەموویشی یارمەتیان داوە دژی سووریا بەڵام ئەو کاتە دوای ئەوە کە ئەوان لە سووریایی چیان پێ نەکرا وهروها لو ناوچانەی لە منتەقە کوردیەکان بە تایبەتی دیفاع کرا شەڕیان کرا ئەوانە گۆڕانکاریەتی بەسەریان نەهات لەو بۆشاییە کە دروست بوو داعش بووی لە عێراق کرد چونکە عێراق خەریک بوو لە بیری چوو بوو کە ئەمریکا ڕووخانیەتی وانزانی خۆیان ڕووخاندووە ئەمە سەدامیان ڕووخاندووە لە بیریان چوو بوو داعش ڕووی کردە بەغدا منتەقەی عێراق داعش بۆ لە ماوەی 900 کەس بوون داعش 900 کەس بۆ لە ماوەی چەند سەعاتێکدا 4 فیرقە جێیشی عێراقی پرچەک لەگەڵ 2 فیرقە پۆلیسیان چەک کرد هۆی چی بوو لەبەر چی ئێستا لە سەدا 35 زیاتر خاکی عێراق لە دەستی داعشە باشە ئێمە چاوەڕێی ئەوەین هاوپەیمانان و ئەمریکا یارمەتیمان بدە ئێران یارمەتیمان بدات لەو دوو سێ ڕۆژەش گوێم لێ بوو سەید نەسرۆڵا لە لوبنانەوەڵێ ئێمەش هێزێکمان ناردووە بە پاراستنی عێراق باشە ئەی عێراقیەکان خۆیان چیەکەن لەکوێن ئەگەر ئێمە ئەوان یارمەتیمان ئەمڕۆ واقعی دروست بووە لە دوێنەوە باسی وحدەی عێراقیە کرێت من لەو بەڕێزانە سوالەکەم لە وحدەی عێراقی ڕەنگە بە تیارە هاتبوون بەسەر عێراق وحدەی عێراقی هەبێ یەک عێراق بێ ئەگەر لێن با بە سیارە لە مووسڵەوە لە هەولێرە بچنەوە مووسڵ بچن بە بەغدا بزانن سێ حکومەت نییە سێ حکومەتی جیاوازە ئەم سێ حکومەتە لە ڕووی ئەرزەوە جۆغرافی سیاسی لە ئینتیخاباتە کورد 2,600,000 دەنگی هەبووە یەک کورسی نە شیعە نە سونە لە کوردستان نییە شیعە لە عێراق 9 ملیۆن دەنگی هەبووە یەک کورسی سونە و کورد لە کەلبەلا و نەجەف و ئەو ناوچەیە نییە لە منتیقەی ئەنباریش سونە 6 ملیۆن دەنگیان هەبووە کورسیەکی شیعە و سونەی لێ نییە جیا بووەتەوە دەسەڵاتی سیاسی ڕئیسی جمهور هی کوردە ڕئیسی وزەرای شیعەیە سەرۆکی پەرلەمانی سونەیە لە ڕووی منتیقەکەوە تەنها جێیشەکەمان ماوە یەک بێ جێیشەکەش ئێستا کورد پێشمەرگەی هەیە حەسی شعبی جێیشی شیعەیە ئەوە مناقەشەی هەرسی وەتەنیەکەن هەرسی وەتەنیش ئینی سونەیە واتە جێیشەکە دەبێتە سێ جێیش باش ئەمە واتە لە 80 ساڵ هیچ نەتیجەیەکی نەبووە هەموو دووبارەیە بێن پێکەوە هەمومان کۆبینەوە سیغەیەکی لێ دابنین سیغەنیەکە چۆن عێراق ئەتوانین ناوی کۆن فیدرالی بێ چۆن پێکەوە ئەتوانین بژین بۆیە من پێم وایە پێویستە هەم ئەمریکا و هاوپەیمانەکان کە کاتی خۆیە با عێراقیان جێن هێشتایە نەئەبوو و ئیسای من سوالێکی ترم هەیە بۆ میزانەی کوردستان بڕاوە ئەوە 14 مانگە قەینە ئەمە بڕاوە مشکلە نییە بەڵام مووسڵ ئێستا پایەگایەکی بەهێزی بەشەری عەسکەری سیاسی ئیعلامی داعاشە بۆ هەموو مانگە میزان موچەی هەموو ئەوێ تەسلیم بە داعاشەکەن ئەیبا بۆ مووسڵ بۆی پێشمەرگە 1500 کیلۆمەتر لە کوبانیوە تا ئەگاتە جەرەولا معاشی مووسڵ و تکریت لە بەغداوە بە تیارەت هێت بەناو پێشمەرگە ئەیدەن بەوان پێشمەرگە لە سەنگەرایە 2 مانگ و 14 ڕۆژە پێشمەرگە معاشی وەرنەگرتووە لەو منتیقە ئەمە ڕۆژێک ئێمە وەک میلەتێک خوێنمان لەبەرە ڕوا لە کوبانی خوێنی لەبەرە ڕوا هەتا جەلەولا شەهید دەدا ڕۆژانە تاکە هێزی ئەمڕۆ شەڕی داعاشەکەن هێزە کوردیەکان شەڕی داعاشەکەن و هەروەها ئێمە سوپاسی هەموو هێزەکانی ترەکەن کە شەڕی داعاشەکەن و سوپاسی هاوپەیمانیش دەکەین کە زوو پشتیوانیان لە میلەتەکەمان کرد بەڵام واقعی عێراق بە بێ کۆنفیدرالی بەم شێوەیە ناڕات تاسر زۆر سوپاسانەکەم
Better now.
So we are officially opening the floor for questions. I don't need it. Any questions? I don't see any questions. Yes, sir.
With his hand over there,
Where?
the end of. Anyway, this is the first one.
Sorry for those of us who didn't get the exact translation. I'm sure this was a very significant remarks. But I wanted to ask about fighting Daesh and what the images that we have seen in Kobani following the defeat of Daesh sends shivers down our spine. If this is what victory means, that we destroy our own towns and villages to defeat Daesh, is this the modus of operandi moving forward in defeating Daesh and destroying more of our lands in the process? And as we have heard over the past 2 days, even if you do destroy Daesh totally, there will be other groups that will arise in their shadows. I would be interested to hear from Mr. Muslim, and specifically as a native of Kobani, your views on the continuing fight and war against Daesh and radicalism.
I'll take one more question. Yes, Governor.
Thank you. I have a question for the lady over there from Turkey. She presented a very nice presentation. Thank you very much. But I have a question, a very short one. Erdogan and AKP were, I'm not defending them, but I'm very realistic. They were brave enough to take the Kurdish causes into the place which we see today. Nobody was brave in Turkey to do that. So I think we should leave this credit for Erdogan and his party. Yes, I agree totally with what you are saying, that he is trying to change the constitution, but no one else was brave enough in Turkey to come to the Kurdish political parties and to negotiate with them, to negotiate with the PKK and with the Kurdish leader who is in prison for 16 years. So I think we should leave that credit for him. Thank you.
I'll take one more question in the back, and then I'll come to you, Khaled.
I have a question for Mr. Saleh Muslim. So I know it's ambitious, the system. Democratic confederalism is really ambitious, and no one can deny that. But my question is, I know we want to do that, but how can we tackle the racism within Middle East? I mean, there is racism amongst everyone. We need to tackle it first, then we can think about democratic confederalism as it is in your program. Like Rojava. Rojava is a perfect example. How can we tackle the racism before that? I mean, look at Iran and Saudi Arabia. And I have a question for Ms. Hafiza Ipek. I cannot speak Turkish, so I'll ask it in English. If Öcalan is not freed, will you go on with the peace negotiations? So, and the alternatives, if the peace negotiation does not succeed, so what is the alternative? We know that there is no independence in your criteria in the Kurdish nationalism in Bakur. So what is the alternative if the peace negotiation does not succeed?
Okay, thank you. And last question, Kale.
Just quickly, Emran mentioned the need for Turkey to embrace the Kurds in Rojava and mentioned that in doing so they would be embracing their own Kurds. So what are the conditions that would need to be in place for that to happen, for Turkey to improve its relations with the PYD? I mean, what would need to happen, the peace process, things like that? What other conditions would need to happen to make that possible?
Thank you. You have two questions?
Yeah. Well, the voice is going?
Yes,
it's all
yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah. Of course, I mean, nobody wants to destroy his villages, his cities. We are, I mean, I cannot introduce, Daesh till you see them and you see what they have done. The city, 80% of the city was destroyed. It's not destroyed by us, destroyed by them. I mean, we are talking about 40 bombing cars in the city, a small city like Kobani. And the villages they have left, they have mined everywhere. And even, I was talking, I mean, in the back of the school children, they have put some bombs in it. And we have maybe tens of our people, they were martyred just because of these mines they have put in the villages. All the villages, I mean, not only the city, it's mined by them, it's destroyed by them. But what you can do, I mean, if they are doing, I mean, the city or the villages a place for the battle, you have, if they are hiding themselves in the homes, everywhere, I mean, they are defending our villages, which they have occupied as their villages. So because of that, we have to fight them. We are not willing to destroy our villages, our places. And even maybe many people, they were talking about Tel Brak and Tel Hamis, what they have been destroyed. And so it's the battle. I mean, you cannot prevent it. Otherwise, you have to leave them in the city or in the villages. Otherwise, they don't go out. So the place, I mean, we were very careful about this point. I mean, from the beginning, since the Syrian revolution, we were very careful about to put those people, I mean, armed people outside of the cities. Just we didn't want to our cities and our towns and our villages to be turned to a battlefield for the others, because we know they are going to destroy, and the villages are our villages and the towns are our villages. They don't care about it, but we should be careful about that. In spite of all of these things, all the villages have been destroyed. And 80% of Kobani is destroyed. So there is no way, I mean, otherwise you have to leave them. I mean, so if you want to just to defeat them and just to push them out, you have to fight them. And I mean, maybe sometimes you don't want, and some villages will be destroyed. And this is the case. And yeah, for the second question, yeah, I think, I don't know for this case, because now we believe, because for the women and for the society, we have democratic measurements for our people. Maybe it was one of the reasons for the succeed of Kobani, because we could share the women. She was defending herself and defending the society. And there was an opportunity for all people to share, to defend themselves. So this is a kind of a democracy for defending. And after that, we have established a system in our area, which is a self-administration, democratic administration in Rojava. And we have a social contract, and everybody is sharing. And now the people, I mean the armed organization, which is YPG, People's Defending Units, they are not only the Kurds, they are Kurds and Arabs and even the Syriacs are sharing in it. So this is a kind of democracy. I mean, if you have a democratic measurements, it's a reason for succeeding. And if you have a democracy in the society, I think the real democracy, I think you can prevent even the attacks, and the society will be able to defend themselves against any invasion or any attacks on them. And one the reason of the succeed of Kobani, we have to know this is the democratic measurement for the society, for the components living together, because all they were one hand to defend their society. And one of them, we have this social contract which is implemented in Rojava. I think it's the best one by the measurement, and even we were discussing them for the Europeans. I mean, it's a kind of constitution, very democratic constitution for the society. So this is the way to maybe for the future, because somebody was asking for the future, what will happen in Syria or in the Middle East. It is democratic measurements, I mean, to make everybody share in the defending themselves, and even for the future life in the society. And this is democratic measurement. We believe this is. So
thank you. Hafizeh, would you like to answer the question on the future of the peace process?
Şimdi tabii evet.
Konuşun.
Şimdi tabii geçmişte 91'den beri PKK defalarca tek taraflı ateşkes uyguladı ve bütün sonucunda da yine PKK gerillaları hep imhayla karşılandı. Dolayısıyla şimdi müzakerelerin olması biz Kürtler açısından oldukça önemli ve desteklediğimiz bir durumdur. Şu anda zaten 10 maddelik Sayın Öcalan'ın sunduğu 10 maddede zaten demokratikleşme adına geliştirilen maddelerdir. Demokratik siyaset yapmak da bunun içinde var. Elbette ki demokratik siyaset derken çünkü geçmişte yine PKK'li gerillalar bir iyi niyet göstergesi olarak Türkiye'ye geldiler ve cezaevine atıldılar. 10 yıl, 8 yıl, 7 yıl cezaevi zindanlarda kaldılar. Bundan sonrasının böyle olmaması açısından yine anayasal düzenlemelerin bu konuda yapılması gerekiyor. Ayrıca Türkiye Kürdistan'ındaki Kürt halkı Sayın Öcalan özgür olmayana kadar kendisini özgür hissetmeyeceğini, asla bunu kabul etmediğini sürekli söylemekte ve etkinlikleriyle devam etmektedir. Ancak bunu yaparken elbette ki yasal düzenlemeler yapılsa zaten Sayın Öcalan cezaevinde kalmayacak. Ön adımların atılması lazım. Az önce dediğim gibi somut adımlar beklemekteyiz Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Devleti'nden. Dolayısıyla bunun dışında tam tersi bir durum ise bir savaşı çağrıştırıyor. Bu da bizler açısından oldukça korkunç görünebilecek şeylerdir. Artık savaş dediğimiz belki eskisi gibi olmayacak. Belki çok daha can alıcı, çok daha can yakıcı bir şekilde olacak. Savaşın her türlüsü aslında vurduğu ilk kesim kadın kesimidir, çocuk kesimidir. Başta biz kadınlar olarak savaşa hayır diyoruz.
Amber, you had two questions.
It wasn't really a question. I think the gentleman was pointing out that the AKP did a lot for the Kurds, and so we should all be extremely grateful. But I'd like to point out that it's primarily thanks to the Kurds themselves that we've seen so much progress. At least 40,000 people have died in this conflict. At least 35,000 of those people were Kurds. So let's not forget that. And also, it wasn't just Mr. Erdogan who engaged the Kurds. Back in 1991, it was a gentleman called Turgut Özal, and Cengiz Candar, who is in this room, knows very well because he was directly involved. He reached out to the Kurds, and particularly to the Kurds who were sitting in this room in northern Iraq, in Iraqi Kurdistan, sorry. Some habits die hard. I also, in response to your question, Kale, how do we move forward in terms of seeing Turkey engage the PYD? I think that's already happening, and we saw it happening on the ground when the Süleyman Shah tomb was being evacuated. It was very clear that there was a lot of negotiations, planning going on, and of course Mr. Muslim is better placed to reveal the details of what happened exactly, but for the first time, or maybe not, we don't know, the Turkish army and the YPG coordinated for this operation to be successful, and it largely was. But looking at how the relationship between Turkey and Iraqi Kurdistan evolved, I think offers us very important clues and a very good example of how the relationship with Rojava could move forward. And primarily, of course, Turkey's intention was really to divide the Kurds, to use the Iraqi Kurds against the PKK. But initially, of course, and I covered that little conflict that you had here between the PKK and PUK, KDP, but over time, the Iraqi Kurds, as they grew more confident, began to say no. They would not be drawn into these proxy wars, and they put their foot down, and Kak Massoud was very firm with the Turkish army that constantly pressured him to keep fighting the PKK, and he said absolutely no. And over time, the relationship broadened. It was no more just tunnel vision about the PKK. There was very strong economic ties between Iraqi Kurdistan and Turkey. And it's thanks to those economic ties, I believe, that Turkish public opinion also has been won over, because indeed there are many Turks who earn a living here, not just Kurds. And so I think this offers a good example. And I would also add that, of course, there's also the American dimension to all of this. And in the same way that the Americans protected the Iraqi Kurds, what happened in Kobani, I think, was really a turning point when American cargo planes dropped ammunition, weapons, and medical supplies to the fighters in Kobani almost hours after President Erdogan said that Kobani was falling. So you do need that outside pressure as well, but of course in a constructive way. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Joost, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to Barham's very well-taken comments. I'd like to think that by picking on two particular issues, you agreed with everything else I said, in which case I'm very pleased with that. But just on those two issues, we all know that there has been long been a competition between the KDP and PUK in Kirkuk. And recently that has escalated. There is no reason that this conflict would turn violent. I fully accept that, but, and I hope certainly it will not. The thing is, I see one worrying trend, which is that over the last few years, the Kurdistan regional government was making great strides in unifying its ranks, the Peshmerga forces, the intelligence. There was still a ways to go, but it was an upward trend. Now I see more of a fragmentation. I see a decline of that. So, and that worries me, that should worry you, I think, unless I'm mistaken. So all I can say is that I hope that you mentioned something very important, which is the democratic process. And I hope that these things can be resolved democratically. The second issue you mentioned is the PUK. It's our strong sense that the PUK is on a historic decline. Maybe it can be reversed. The thing is that the PUK, while having now much less popular support than it used to, certainly in Sulaymaniyah, it still has it in Kirkuk. But in Sulaymaniyah, that while it has less popular support, it still has a military force. While the opposition, which is now stronger, and in fact no longer an opposition in Sulaymaniyah, doesn't have a military force. That is a very dangerous imbalance. And again, I hope that that particular rivalry, let's call it, can also be resolved democratically. And it reinforces the point that what needs to happen really is the continuation of the process of unifying the KRG and putting these military forces under civilian command under the KRG. That's the solution to both problems.
I'll take a couple of questions, and then I will also ask one question to Kamran myself. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I see no curse from Iran here. It seems that only Iran is the winner of this situation. That's all I got. It was just a comment, and I do not. I'm looking maybe Mr. Hilton as he is the.
We can't hear you. Can you speak?
I do not. Did you get my early message? I see no curse from Iran, from Eastern Kurdistan here. Is Iran the only winner of this situation going on in the Middle East?
Thank you. I'll take one more. Okay. Yes. Wait for the microphone, please.
My question is for His Excellency Salih Muslim. We read here and there that Turkey has allegedly supported ISIS. I want you to tell us today whether there's any truth to these allegations. Thank you.
Two actually very good questions. Let me ask Kamran Karadaghi a question. You've been an observer of the Iraqi government, the Kurdish government. You have more experience than most people. One of the things we haven't talked in this conference that Dov Zakheim tried to introduce was the question of Assad in Syria. is there a difference in the way the Iraqi government and the Kurdistan regional government looks at Assad? And what is it, can we think about the future of Kurdistan in general without thinking about what happens in Syria and the future of Assad? So that's my question to you, Kamal. But we'll start with, the first question was on, first question was on Iran. Anybody wants to answer? Joost.
Oh, I'd love to. So everybody else was earlier avoiding the question on Iran, so I couldn't wait. I'm not sure about the Iranian Kurds part, but on whether Iran is the winner, I've long ago learned that here in this country, in this region, there are no winners, there are only losers. The losers are us, and the population living here, of course, I didn't mean myself. Because each time everything that is being built is being destroyed again at great human cost and tragedy. So is Iran the winner in this case? Well, Iran may be gaining influence right now in Iraq through its support of the Shia militias, the Hashd al-Sha'bi. But, you know, there is I think it was, maybe it was David Petraeus or it was Ryan Crocker, maybe it was Ryan Crocker, but at that time when you were both working together in Iraq, who said that Iran is a self-constraining power in a sense that it will reach its natural limit at some point. Now, it has gone a little bit further than maybe we had expected at that time. It is in the end a Shia power. It is a Persian power. It is only so much traction, so much support it can get in Arab lands, in Kurdish lands, in Sunni lands. And so, yes, it has to support. Maybe that militarily it can push back Daesh, but then what? We've already talked about, Kamaran mentioned it, was mentioned in early panels, what about the day after? Does Iran truly think it can govern this Sunni area, Sunni Arab areas? Forget it, they know very well they cannot. They're not stupid. So what do they do then? Well, they'll have to put somebody in place that does it. Well, good luck to them. It's not going to work either, because anybody implanted by Iran will not be accepted by the local population. So the Iranians are going to run into serious trouble very soon if they continue to push far beyond their area of natural influence. The Iranians have long played it very safely by insinuating itself into the Iraqi political system in Baghdad while the American troops were on the ground still, and afterwards. It's only in the last year that they have, since June, that they have put its military advisors on the ground. That is a great gamble they took. Call them the winner? I doubt it.
Mr. Muslim, about Turkey and ISIS.
Yes, well, I have one comment and one answer.
Okay.
First, I will answer, then I have a comment. For the relation between Daesh and Turkey, it's not our word. I mean, there were some television channels, they were alive, broadcasting how they have a meeting on the borders of Kobani and how the ISIS members are passing from the north to Kobani area. So all will broadcast it alive, and everybody knows that. And more than that, and we know, I mean, those people recently from the media, that's the Turkey is the pathway. I mean, is the highway for those members coming from Europe to Syria and to Rojava, exactly. And this is the other, thing which everybody knows and saying that. And they are turning back to Europe even through Turkey. So it's the pathway going and coming back. And more than that, I mean, we have during the battle from our sources from YPG, I mean, many people, they were killed during this fighting in Rojava and Kobani. Some of them, they were Turkish identity. This is something different, maybe the individuals, but some captured of people, they were saying that were trained in Turkey. So all this evidences, and we don't know the truth. So this is what we are hearing and seeing it. And the comment I wanted to say now, because during these 2 days, we were listening to all the people, I mean, saying that, the international forces, the international are doing it for their benefits and for their interest in the Middle East and doing everything. I would like to say, if we don't solve our problems together by dialogue, by listening to each other, by democratic ways, so it will be open area for everybody to get benefit and to do what they are doing, I mean, now. Just for example, if Muawiyah and Ali, they have solved their problem 1,400 years ago, we wouldn't have fighting between the Sunnis and Shias today, just because we are keeping. And now there are some people trying to make this fighting going on again for 1,400 years, I mean, in future also. So we have to be careful. We have to listen to each other. We have to find, a solution for our problems. This is the dialogue we can do. If we don't, of course, the others will get benefit and do what they like, according to their benefits. And I thank you again.
Thank you. Ambirin wants to just say one thing.
I just wanted to add that, of course, we do give the AKP credit for many things without question, but we would like it to revert to its factory settings, as we say in Turkey.
Kamal, you have the last word.
Yeah, well, I just want really to comment on the gentleman who asked about Iran. I don't want to talk about Iran, winner or loser. I just want to say that I have a serious wish, really. Whenever I participate in events like this here or in Britain or anywhere else, I have always asked, what about Kurds in Iran? And the reason I said, well, why don't you invite somebody from Iran, a Kurd from Iran, to talk about this? So my wish is that we are here representing 3 parts of Kurdistan, but as we call it, Bakur and Bashur and Rojava, but we would like to see in future representatives from Rojhelat as well.
You want to answer the other question, or you want to?
No, that's
okay. All right. Thank you very much, and we conclude this panel. And thanks participants for